$200 in fines. That's what my illegal dam cost me. The dam I built after my wife died, just trying to save something beautiful in this world. Standing there watching the HOA bulldozer tear apart 3 years of my grief work, I could smell the diesel fumes mixing with Eleanor's crushed wildflowers. The board president, Brenda, she actually brought popcorn, stood there crunching away like it was dinner theater. "Sorry, Frank," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Rules are rules." 3 months later, I'm sipping my morning coffee, watching that same bulldozer pull her Range Rover out of a 10-foot sinkhole. Her $1 million house, sliding down the hill like melted butter. Turns out when you destroy the only thing preventing a flood, Mother Nature sends you the bill, and she doesn't accept payment plans.
What would you do if HOA bullies destroyed your memorial to your spouse? Drop your story below. How far would you go for justice? My name's Frank Kowalski, and at 67, I thought I'd seen every kind of stupidity this world had to offer. 30 years as a master plumber will teach you that much. Rich folks' problems usually boil down to what flows where, and what happens when you try to make water flow uphill. I've lived on this 2-acre slice of Colorado foothills for 3 decades. Back then, Willowbrook was just scattered ranch houses along the creek, where the smell of pine sap mixed with wild sage every morning, and your nearest neighbor was close enough to help but far enough to mind their own business. Then Eleanor got sick. Cancer gave us 2 years of borrowed time. After her funeral, our house felt hollow as an empty pipe, so I did what any plumber does with something broken. I fixed it. Built a small earthen dam where the creek curved through our property, nothing fancy. Just moved dirt, laid river stones smooth as glass under my calloused hands, created a pond where Eleanor used to love watching deer drink at sunset. The work kept me sane. Sitting there evenings, listening to water trickle over the spillway like Eleanor humming in the kitchen, watching cattails grow where her sunflowers used to dance in the breeze. That pond became home to wood ducks, industrious beavers, and one great blue heron who'd stand motionless as a statue until you forgot he was real. Eleanor would have loved that patient old bird. Then the developers invaded like locusts with business plans, Willowbrook Estates. Suddenly my quiet neighborhood sprouted gates, speed bumps, and an HOA with more rules than a federal prison. $1 million colonials mushroomed overnight, each one built right to the creek bank like physics was optional for rich people. Most new neighbors seemed decent enough, waved from their German cars, complained about dust at meetings I avoided like tax audits. But one stood out like a sore thumb with fresh manicure, Brenda Ashworth. Real estate shark in designer athleisure, drives a white Range Rover she treats like a religious artifact. Lives in the neighborhood's biggest colonial, the one with the circular driveway, ornamental fountain, and enough outdoor lighting to guide aircraft. Our first meeting? She showed up measuring my fence line with a tape measure, wearing white capri pants and stilettos that kept punching holes in my lawn like tiny fence posts. The morning air carried the scent of creek water and wet earth, mixed with whatever expensive perfume she'd bathed in. "Mr. Kowalski," voice sweet as antifreeze. "I'm Brenda Ashworth, HOA board president. We need to discuss your unauthorized water feature." Water feature. Like Eleanor's memorial was some mall fountain. "It's a pond," I said, watching a red-winged blackbird hunt mosquitoes. "Built it myself." "That's precisely the problem." She brandished a folder thick as a dictionary. "Our covenants require architectural review for all exterior modifications. This," she waved at my pond like it was a septic overflow, "wasn't approved." Here's a fun fact. When someone calls your dead wife's memorial an unapproved modification, you discover muscles in your jaw you forgot existed. Built this after Eleanor died, before your HOA was even a twinkle in some lawyer's eye. I'm very sorry for your loss. The words had all the warmth of a frozen pipe. But we can't have unauthorized structures disrupting property values, the aesthetic impact alone. She pulled out her phone, started photographing my pond like evidence at a crime scene. Click, click, click. Each shutter snap felt like nails on a chalkboard. "You've got 14 days to remove it, or we start daily fines. $200 initial penalty, $50 per day after that. $200 for a pond that prevented flooding, supported wildlife, and honored my wife's memory." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with a predator in yoga pants, and she just made the biggest mistake of her manicured life. 2 weeks later, I found myself in the community center, surrounded by enough fake wood paneling to outfit a 1970s basement. The air smelled like industrial carpet cleaner in desperation. The HOA board sat at a folding table like judges at a kangaroo court, each clutching their binders like sacred texts.
Brenda had dressed for the occasion, navy blazer, pearl earrings, the kind of power outfit that screams, "I'd like to speak to your manager." She'd even brought visual aids, poster-sized photos of my pond blown up to make it look like I'd built the Hoover Dam in my backyard. As you can see, she announced to the sparse crowd of bored homeowners, this unauthorized structure creates significant liability concerns. She clicked through photos on her laptop like a prosecutor presenting evidence. What if a child drowns? What if the dam fails and floods downstream properties? The board nodded along like bobbleheads on a dashboard, all except Betty Blair, a retired third-grade teacher with more spine than the rest of them combined. She raised her hand, wedding ring clicking against the metal chair. Have there been any actual complaints from neighbors? Brenda's smile tightened like over-torqued pipe fittings. Mrs. Blair, we can't wait for tragedy to strike. Prevention is key. Rick Hoffman, board treasurer and part-time construction contractor, leaned into his microphone. The screech of feedback made everyone wince appropriate soundtrack for what came next. Look, we can't set precedent for every hillbilly engineering project someone dreams up. What's next? Chicken coops, tool sheds, hot tub installations? He gestured at me like I was Exhibit A in the decline of Western civilization. Hillbilly engineering? From a guy whose own deck was held up with concrete blocks and prayer. That's when I stood up, manila folder in hand. 30 years of dealing with contractors had taught me one thing. When someone questions your work, you better have receipts. If we're talking about engineering, let's talk facts. The room went quieter than a broken water heater. I opened my folder and pulled out a professional engineering report, complete with official letterhead and enough technical diagrams to choke a horse. This is from Morrison & Associates, structural engineers. Cost me $500, but it says my hillbilly dam actually reduces flooding risk by 30% and creates natural groundwater recharge for the entire area. You could hear a pin drop. Or in Rick's case, you could hear his jaw hit the table with a satisfying thunk. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out a document I'd researched at the county courthouse, my property has riparian water rights that predate your HOA by 23 years. Back in my apprentice days, an old-timer had taught me about water rights, how property next to streams often came with legal protections that trump newer rules. Smart old bastard probably saved me thousands in legal fees from the grave. Brenda's face had gone from confident pink to worried pale, like someone had just turned off her main water valve. Mr. Kowalski, that may be technically accurate, but we still have legitimate concerns about liability and aesthetics. Aesthetics? I pulled out another document, savoring the moment. Funny thing about aesthetics, your brother-in-law's landscaping company installed that fountain in your front yard without any permits. According to county records, it's pulling 400 gallons per day from the municipal water supply during a drought restriction. The silence stretched like a guitar string about to snap. Even the heating system seemed to hold its breath. But Brenda hadn't gotten where she was by folding at the first sign of trouble. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out what looked like her nuclear option. The board appreciates your research, Mr. Kowalski, but we've consulted with the county building department. She slid a letter across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Inspector Morrison confirmed that structures over 3 feet high require permits, which you don't have. The county has agreed to issue a violation notice. My stomach dropped like a lead pipe hitting concrete. Building permits, the one angle I hadn't considered. Remove the dam voluntarily, she continued, her honey voice dripping with false sympathy, or face municipal enforcement action. But here's the thing about being a plumber for 30 years. You learn that every system has weak points, and when someone drops a building inspector's name like their personal friends, that's usually where the real pressure problems start. Betty Blair caught my eye from across the room and mouthed 2 words, "Fight this." Over the next week, I channeled my inner bloodhound. Turns out retirement gives you plenty of time for detective work, and a legitimate grudge provides excellent motivation. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests, combed through county contractor records, read public meeting minutes until my eyes burned. What I found made my plumber's instincts sing like a perfectly tuned pipe wrench. Dale Morrison, our impartial building inspector, had approved 3 major projects for Brenda's brother-in-law without competitive bidding. 2 violations dismissed for HOA board members without explanation. And 1 very interesting country club membership where Dale and Brenda apparently played golf doubles every Thursday. My kitchen table transformed into mission control papers scattered everywhere. Cold coffee growing a skin thicker than municipal corruption. Highlighter bleeding through documents like evidence of a pattern I was just beginning to understand. The violation notice arrived on a Tuesday, bright orange as a traffic cone, official county seal gleaming like a badge of authority.
remove the unauthorized structure within 30 days, or face daily fines of $200, $200 a day. On my fixed income, I could maybe last 2 weeks before choosing between groceries and principal. But looking out my window at Eleanor's pond, watching that patient heron stalk minnows in water clear as her memory, I heard her voice. Frank, bullies only win when good people give up. 3 days after the violation notice arrived, I was enjoying my morning coffee when the rumble of diesel engines shattered my peaceful routine. Through my kitchen window, I watched a white county truck pull up, followed by Brenda's pristine Range Rover like a shark trailing a wounded fish. The morning air carried the smell of exhaust fumes mixing with my neighbor's blooming lilacs, a combination that should have been peaceful but felt ominous as a funeral arrangement. Dale Morrison climbed out of the truck, clipboard clutched like a security blanket, belly straining against a county polo shirt that had clearly lost the war against too many donut shop lunches. Behind him marched the entire HOA board, crossing my lawn like they were storming Normandy Beach. "Mr. Kowalski!" Morrison bellowed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been challenged in 20 years of small-town power. "Emergency inspection. Anonymous complaint about structural instability." Anonymous complaint, and I was supposedly the tooth fairy. "You need a warrant for that," I called from my porch, the familiar wooden boards creaking under my feet like old bones settling. "Building code violations fall under public safety authority." He waved his clipboard like Moses with the tablets. "Imminent danger to the community. You cooperate or we involve officers with enforcement powers." Behind him, Brenda practically purred with satisfaction, positioned where she could watch both the inspection and my reaction, probably hoping to see me fold like a bad poker hand. But here's something about 30 years of emergency plumbing calls. You learn to spot bullshit from a mile away. When someone shows up claiming emergency authority with no advance notice, they're usually trying to catch you before you can think straight. "What specific structural instability?" I asked, pulling out my phone to record. "And who filed this complaint?" Morrison squinted at his paperwork like he was decoding ancient hieroglyphics. "Potential dam failure due to, inadequate engineering oversight." "Complainant's name?" "Confidential information, of course." I watched them march toward Eleanor's pond like invaders, Morrison poking at my carefully laid stonework with a metal rod while the board clustered around looking official. Rick Hoffman had the audacity to pull out a measuring tape, as if he could tell engineered stability from a hole in the ground. After they left, naturally finding concerns requiring further evaluation, I did what any self-respecting retiree with too much time and a legitimate grudge does. I went full detective mode. That evening, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all Morrison's correspondence with HOA members. Something Eleanor taught me during her cancer fight: government employees work for us, and their communications are public record. The trick is being specific about dates and names, otherwise they bury you in irrelevant paperwork like snow in January. 3 weeks later, my mailbox delivered Christmas morning. Email after email between Morrison and Brenda spanning 2 years. Discussion of problematic properties needing code compliance review. A crystal-clear pattern, elderly homeowners targeted, violations miraculously discovered, properties eventually sold to Brenda's clients at bargain prices. But the smoking gun nearly made me choke on my coffee. Hugo Brennan's situation resolved nicely. Property listed yesterday $300K under assessment, your usual consulting fee deposited. Consulting fee for a supposedly impartial county employee. I printed everything, organized it like evidence files, started connecting dots that painted a picture uglier than a backed-up sewer line. Hugo Brennan forced out after overnight septic violations that 3 independent contractors called bogus. Martha Kowalski, no relation, cited for dangerous electrical work that passed every inspection until Morrison showed up. Both properties now belong to Brenda's buyers. Both sales netted her company hefty commissions. They weren't just harassing me about my dam, they were running a systematic con game, targeting longtime residents who couldn't afford legal fights. But I needed more than emails. I needed them caught in the act. That's when I remembered Dylan's Christmas gift, a trail camera for wildlife photography. My grandson had programmed it to send alerts to my phone, figuring his grandfather might enjoy watching deer and birds. What he probably didn't expect was surveillance operations. I positioned the camera to monitor both the dam and approach routes. If they planned more emergency inspections or convenient damage to justify their safety theater, I wanted evidence. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. The image showed a dark figure examining my dam with a flashlight, photographing angles, and I couldn't believe my eyes.
actually loosening stones from the spillway structure. The motion sensor triggered again when the saboteur moved closer. The camera's flash illuminated the face clearly, captured like a deer in headlights. Dale Morrison, county building inspector, personally damaging the structure he was supposedly evaluating for public safety. I had him dead to rights. But studying those photos in my kitchen, the taste of betrayal bitter as burnt coffee grounds, I realized something bigger. This wasn't about my pond anymore. This was about a corrupt system that preyed on people who couldn't fight back, who trusted government officials to act honestly, who believed rules applied equally to everyone. Time to teach them that some old dogs know very new tricks. The registered letter arrived on a Thursday morning, thick as a phone book and twice as menacing. The return address read Pemberton, Walsh and Associates, the kind of white shoe law firm that probably charged $500 just to use their letterhead. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, expensive paper stock that crackled with authority and smelled like intimidation mixed with fresh ink. Cease and desist screamed from the top in letters bold enough to wake the dead. Below that, enough legal jargon to choke a courthouse, demanding immediate removal of my unauthorized structure, payment of accumulated fines now totaling $4,200, and a promise to never again interfere with legitimate HOA governance. But the real gut punch came in paragraph 3. Furthermore, the subject structure constitutes an attractive nuisance under Colorado revised statutes, creating liability exposure for wrongful death claims should any individual suffer harm while accessing defendant's property. Attractive nuisance. Lawyer speak for, we'll sue you into the Stone Age if someone stubs their toe. They were painting my peaceful pond like some kind of death trap, waiting to snare innocent children like a spider web made of water and malice. I poured myself coffee, my 4th cup that morning strong enough to dissolve spoons, and studied their fancy language. Something about their tactics reminded me of insurance adjusters during Eleanor's cancer fight, throwing around complex terms and false urgency to confuse people into surrendering. Back then, I'd learned that most legal threats are theater, designed to scare you before you can research the facts. So I fired up my old laptop and started digging. Turns out, attractive nuisance doctrine has specific requirements that would make a tax code look simple. The property has to be artificially dangerous, likely to attract kids, and hazardous in ways children can't understand. Natural water features serving legitimate purposes like flood control and wildlife habitat generally don't qualify. Something I might have learned sooner if I'd been a lawyer instead of a plumber. But Eleanor always said my real education came from fixing other people's mistakes. Better yet, I found Colorado Stream Defense, a water rights advocacy group with more legal firepower than Brenda's entire HOA. Their website was like discovering a hidden toolbox full of exactly what I needed. When I called, expecting some bored receptionist, a real human answered. Jessica Martinez, environmental attorney, who listened to my story with the focus of a surgeon planning a delicate operation. Mr. Kowalski, she said after I'd finished, what you're describing sounds like systematic property fraud. That's not just HOA overreach. That could be federal civil rights violations. Section 1983 violations carry mandatory attorney fees, which means the defendants pay our costs when we win. Federal violations. Suddenly my little pond had become the center of something much bigger than neighborhood politics. I'm taking this case pro bono, Jessica continued. This kind of corruption needs stopping, and you've gathered evidence that most attorneys only dream about. While Jessica worked her legal magic, I focused on what I did best, documenting everything with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 30 years tracking down leaks. Every conversation got recorded, every interaction logged in a composition notebook that would have made my old supervisor weep with pride. But Brenda wasn't hibernating either. That's when Hugo Brennan knocked on my door, looking about as comfortable as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Hugo was solid people-retired machinist, lawn like a golf course, minded his own business. But something had him rattled. "Frank, I need to tell you something," he said, twisting his baseball cap like he was wringing water from it. We stood in my garage where the smell of old motor oil mixed with Hugo's nervous sweat. Brenda came by yesterday, made me an offer on my place. Thinking about selling? Hell no. But she wasn't exactly asking politely. Hugo's voice dropped, like he was sharing state secrets. Said the county was planning major infrastructure work. Road widening, utility upgrades, claimed property values were about to crater unless folks got out ahead of the curve. My plumber's instincts started singing like pressurized pipes before a blowout. She mentioned specifics? That's what spooked me. Everything was vague as morning fog. But she had paperwork, county letterhead, throwing around terms like eminent domain and infrastructure assessments. Hugo kicked at loose gravel, each stone clicking like worry beads. Frank, I think she's running the same con she pulled on Martha and the others. That evening, I called Jessica with Hugo's intel. Her response included several words that would have made a sailor request shore leave. They're operating a full fraud ring, she said. Manufactured government threats, fake code violations, systematic targeting. We need to document everything and prepare for public exposure before they destroy more families. The escalation continued like water finding its level. Morrison's truck cruising past my house twice daily. Brenda leaving violation notices for microscopic infractions, grass 1 inch too high, mailbox allegedly non-regulation, trash cans visible for 30 seconds too long on pickup day. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to grind me down like sandpaper on soft wood. But the line got crossed 2 weeks later when I discovered someone had dumped motor oil into Eleanor's pond. The petroleum slick coated her cattails like black grief, sent my wood duck family fleeing, and left a dead muskrat floating among the poisoned reeds. The stench of oil mixing with pond water burned my nostrils, but what really ignited my fury was the violation of Eleanor's memory. They'd declared war on a dead woman's memorial. Game over. Time to finish this fight. Betty Blair appeared at my door the next morning like an avenging angel disguised as a retired teacher, clutching a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. Her silver hair caught the early sunlight, and behind her wire-rimmed glasses, I caught a glint of something that looked suspiciously like barely contained fury. "Frank, we need to talk," she said, brushing past me into my kitchen with the authority of someone who'd managed third graders for 30 years. "I've been doing homework, and what I found is going to make your day." She spread documents across my kitchen table with surgical precision, each paper positioned like evidence in a murder trial. The musty smell of old filing cabinets mixed with Betty's lavender perfume, creating an oddly comforting scent of rebellion and organization. "You know how I mentioned keeping copies of everything from my board years?" Betty's fingers traced highlighted passages like she was reading gospel. "Well, I dug out the original HOA and corporation documents, not the sanitized versions Brenda waves around like Holy Scripture, but the real McCoy." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "And? Your dam isn't just protected, Frank. It's bulletproof." She slapped down a thick document bearing official seals and enough legal stamps to start a post office. Section 12C of the original covenants. Existing water management structures predating HOA incorporation remain under exclusive property owner jurisdiction, exempt from all architectural oversight, maintenance requirements, and removal demands. The words hit me like finding a $20 bill in an old jacket pocket. They never had authority. Not one damn bit. Betty's teacher voice carried the satisfaction of catching a student cheating red-handed. This entire harassment campaign has been based on completely fabricated authority. They've been bluffing with a busted flush. But she wasn't done dealing cards yet. "This," she said, producing spreadsheets covered in enough red ink to paint a barn, "is our HOA's real financial situation. Frank, we're not just broke. We're crater deep in debt." I studied the numbers while my plumber's brain calculated disaster scenarios. "How broke are we talking?" "Try $2.3 million lawsuit broke." Betty's whisper carried the weight of state secrets. "Counties suing us over repeated storm drainage failures, 3 major flooding incidents, multiple homes damaged, insurance companies pointing fingers at inadequate HOA infrastructure planning." The irony tasted bitter as burnt coffee grounds. They'd been trying to destroy the one structure preventing exactly the disasters that were bankrupting them. "Gets better," Betty continued, producing computer printouts that looked like meteorological prophecy. "My neighbor Carol's a state hydrologist. I asked her to model what happens when your dam disappears. The data painted a picture scarier than any horror movie. Flow velocity increases, bank erosion patterns, foundation undermining timelines. But the summary was written in English that made my stomach drop like a broken elevator. Retention structure removal during peak runoff will cause 340% velocity increase, complete bank destabilization within 48 hours, and catastrophic foundation damage to all downstream properties within 72 hours. 72 hours from dam removal to neighborhood destruction. "Betty," I said slowly, "when's spring snowmelt supposed to peak?" She checked her phone, consulting weather service predictions. Her face went pale as fresh snow. "Next week.
Heavy mountain snowpack, warm front moving in. They're calling it the biggest runoff in 15 years. Pieces click together like perfectly matched pipe threads. Brenda's sudden urgency. Morrison's willingness to fabricate emergencies. The legal blitz designed to force rapid compliance before I could organize proper resistance. They knew my dam was all that stood between their investment portfolios and natural disaster. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Force dam removal. Let Mother Nature do their dirty work. Then claim they were just following building codes when the whole neighborhood washed away. "Frank," Betty whispered, "I think they're planning to make you the scapegoat for flooding they know is coming." Outside my kitchen window, Eleanor's poisoned pond reflected morning clouds like a broken promise, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of mountain snowmelt beginning its journey toward our little valley. The hunters had just become the hunted. The War Council convened in my garage that evening, surrounded by the familiar perfume of motor oil, WD-40, and 30 years of honest work. Betty arrived first, clutching a briefcase that looked like it could survive a nuclear audit, followed by Hugo and Martha Brennan, whose matching windbreakers made them look like they were heading to a church potluck instead of planning a legal ambush. The real artillery walked in 20 minutes later. Jessica Martinez, environmental lawyer, carrying a laptop and the kind of predatory focus that makes corporate attorneys update their resumes. "All right, folks," Jessica announced, commandeering my workbench between a socket wrench set and Eleanor's ceramic flower pots, a fitting blend of the practical and the beautiful. "We're not fighting a homeowners association anymore. We're dismantling a criminal enterprise." Her laptop presentation unfolded like a prosecutor's closing argument. Frank's evidence documents systematic corruption spanning multiple years, involving municipal bribery, fraudulent property schemes, and textbook civil rights violations. This is federal case material with potential criminal referrals. Betty spread her documentation across my tool chest like a general planning D-Day. The original covenants give Frank ironclad protection for his dam. Every fine, every threat, every harassment tactic has been completely illegal since day one. Better than that, Jessica added, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Municipal officials who violate clearly established constitutional rights lose qualified immunity. Morrison and his conspirators become personally liable for damages, their houses, their retirement accounts, their kids' college funds. Here's something they don't teach in civics class. When government employees abuse their power under color of law, the legal system turns predatory. Section 1983 violations strip away official protections, making corrupt officials personally responsible for every dollar of damage they cause. Plus, they're required to pay your legal fees when you win. It's like having a legal landmine buried under every abuse of power. Hugo leaned forward, his machinist's precision evident in color-coded notes that would make an engineer weep with joy. "Frank, I documented 5 other households targeted with identical tactics. Brenda's pattern is clearer than a blueprint. Manufactured violations, intimidation campaigns, forced sales to her real estate clients." Martha's voice carried the righteous fury of a woman who'd survived the Great Depression and wasn't about to be bullied by someone young enough to be her granddaughter. "She tried the same con on us last year, claimed our perfectly good septic system was failing, demanded $40,000 replacement, nearly gave Harold a coronary from stress alone." Jessica's fingers danced across her keyboard, documenting each revelation with prosecutorial thoroughness. That's textbook racketeering under federal statutes. Pattern of intimidation for financial gain. We established this across multiple victims. We're looking at serious prison time for everyone involved. The technical coordination came together like a Swiss watch. Jessica had connected with Denver Post investigative reporter Sarah Blair. Betty swore they weren't related, despite the coincidence, who was practically salivating over a story combining municipal corruption, environmental disaster, and small-town David versus corporate Goliath. "Timing is crucial," Jessica explained, displaying hydrological charts that looked like invasion maps. "Spring runoff peaks in 6 days. When they demolish Frank's dam, we'll have real-time documentation of preventable disaster. Nothing convicts corrupt officials like watching their decisions destroy homes on live television." My engineer buddy Tom Rodriguez had provided flood modeling that painted scenarios scarier than any disaster movie. Without my dam buffering the flow, creek velocity would triple within hours, bank erosion would commence immediately, and foundation undermining would begin within 48 hours. The million-dollar colonials built closest to water, especially Brenda's Pride and Joy estate, would experience Mother Nature's justice first and fastest.
Our strategy is elegantly simple, I said, consulting notes organized with the methodical precision Eleanor used to admire. We document everything while letting natural consequences unfold. Multiple game cameras for complete coverage, time-stamped photography, real-time water monitoring through Dylan's smartphone technology. Betty's grandson had engineered a surveillance system that would impress military contractors. Motion-activated cameras with night vision, automated alerts to multiple devices, even drone capability for aerial disaster footage. The beauty, Jessica emphasized, lies in legal distance. We're not causing flooding. We're simply allowing their illegal demolition to reveal inevitable natural results. Martha raised the moral question eating at all of us. What about innocent neighbors? Families who never supported this corruption? Already handled, I replied, feeling Eleanor's influence in my decision. Every downstream resident received flood risk warnings. Most dismissed them as crazy old man paranoia, but insurance companies have documentation, and emergency contacts are updated. I'd also quietly moved Eleanor's memorial garden above the projected flood zone. Her memory would survive this battle, even if her original pond didn't. Final element, Jessica announced, consulting her legal timeline with the satisfaction of someone holding royal flush cards. The moment demolition begins, I'm filing federal civil rights suits against every participant. Asset freezes, personal liability claims, criminal referrals to FBI white-collar crime division. Outside my garage, evening darkness settled over our peaceful valley like calm before the perfect storm. In less than a week, this quiet neighborhood would become ground zero for natural forces versus human hubris. Everyone understand their assignments? I asked, studying faces illuminated by harsh fluorescent light. Unanimous determination. After months of being hunted, we'd finally become the predators. Brenda's character assassination campaign launched at dawn with the surgical precision of a military strike and all the subtlety of a garbage truck backing through a library. The first wave hit every mailbox in Willowbrook Estates while decent folks were still stumbling toward their coffee makers, the crisp morning air carrying the scent of fresh betrayal printed on expensive cardstock. Concerned neighbors alert screamed from blood-red headlines that practically vibrated with manufactured panic. Below that, a photograph of my pond taken from an angle that would make a beauty queen look like a swamp monster, all shadows and murky water, carefully cropped to hide the thriving wildlife and natural beauty Eleanor had loved so much. The text read like a psychiatric evaluation written by someone who'd learned psychology from daytime television. Local resident Frank Kowalski has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior following his wife's tragic death. Mental health experts warn that isolated elderly men often suffer compromised judgment and dangerous decision-making patterns. His obsessive refusal to comply with basic safety regulations regarding his backyard construction project raises legitimate concerns about cognitive decline and community safety. I had to admire the craftsmanship, just enough medical jargon to sound authoritative, just enough fake compassion to seem caring, and just enough careful phrasing to dance around actual libel charges. Whoever wrote this had studied character assassination like it was an art form, but the real gut punch came in the closing paragraph. For our children's safety and neighborhood property protection, concerned residents should immediately contact Adult Protective Services to report potentially dangerous living conditions at 1247 Willowbrook Lane. Adult Protective Services. The nuclear option of social warfare painting me as mentally incompetent and dangerous to myself and others. My phone started ringing before I'd finished reading, neighbors I'd known since the Reagan administration calling, with voices mixing genuine worry and uncomfortable suspicion. Was I eating properly? Had I been acting strange? Maybe it was time to consider simpler living arrangements with professional support. Even my nephew called from Denver, suggesting I might want to get ahead of this situation by voluntarily seeking evaluation. Maybe consider selling the house to reduce stress and complications. By noon, a White County sedan pulled up my driveway, disgorging two women in business suits that screamed government authority louder than a siren. They carried clipboards like weapons and professional smiles that belonged in a mortuary sales office. The older one introduced herself as Linda Morrison. No relation to the building inspector, she assured me, with the kind of coincidence that made lottery winners look common. Mr. Kowalski, we're following up on multiple community reports regarding your well-being, she announced, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd been ruining lives professionally for decades. The younger woman stood behind her like backup, taking notes on everything from my posture to my coffee-stained shirt. They wanted full home inspection, cognitive assessment interviews, evaluation of my capacity for independent decision-making and safe property maintenance, standard procedure triggered by anonymous reports of concerning behavioral patterns. Here's where 30 years of dealing with municipal bullies paid better dividends than any retirement account. I knew they needed either court orders or voluntary consent, and I knew that seeming uncooperative would only feed their predetermined narrative about my supposed mental decline. "Ladies, I appreciate the county's concern for my welfare," I said, channeling my most reasonable grandfather persona while my cameras documented every word. "However, today's inconvenient for detailed assessments. My attorney will contact your office to schedule appropriate meetings with proper legal representation." The mention of lawyers hit them like ice water on a hot skillet. Linda's professional smile flickered, and her business card trembled slightly when she handed it over. "Mr. Kowalski, we're simply trying to help. Perhaps there are family members we should involve." "My attorney will coordinate all necessary communications," I repeated, closing the door with the polite firmness Eleanor had perfected for persistent door-to-door salespeople. But Brenda's desperation was just getting warmed up. That night, my motion sensors erupted like New Year's fireworks, flooding my phone with alerts that jerked me from the first decent sleep I'd managed in weeks. The camera footage revealed two figures in dark clothing working around my dam, with flashlights and what looked suspiciously like small packages. Dawn revealed their handiwork, crude explosive devices planted along my spillway industrial firecrackers, positioned to create dramatic-looking damage without actual structural compromise. Scare tactics designed to justify emergency demolition orders from panicked municipal officials. But they'd made a crucial error. In their rush to plant evidence, they'd positioned the charges in locations any competent engineer would immediately recognize as cosmetic damage points. Areas that might photograph scary for bureaucratic consumption but wouldn't actually threaten dam integrity. I called Jessica before finishing my first cup of coffee. Her response included several words that would make a longshoreman request sensitivity training. Federal terrorism charges just entered the conversation. Placing explosives to justify government property seizure. FBI's gonna love this. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. In their desperation to paint me as mentally unstable and dangerous, they'd committed actual federal crimes that carried serious prison time. Sometimes the best strategy is just letting your enemies dig their own graves deep enough to bury themselves. 3 days until peak snowmelt. 3 days until natural forces would either vindicate my engineering or expose their corruption in front of federal investigators. Either way, the waiting was almost over. Demolition Day arrived with all the fanfare of a public execution, complete with spectators and the smell of diesel fuel hanging in the morning air like incense at a funeral for common sense. I stood at my kitchen window watching the parade of destruction roll up my driveway. County bulldozer, Morrison's white truck, and Brenda's Range Rover leading the procession like a hearse at the head of a very expensive funeral cortege. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of Colorado spring day that made you believe in fresh starts and second chances. Birds sang in Eleanor's oak tree, oblivious to the human drama about to unfold below their peaceful branches. The irony cut deep as a knife blade, destroying something beautiful on a day that practically screamed for preservation and growth. Morrison climbed down from the bulldozer like he was dismounting a conquering warhorse, clipboard tucked under his arm like a battle standard, belly straining against a county polo shirt that had clearly surrendered to too many municipal lunch meetings. Behind him, Brenda emerged from her vehicle wearing what could only be described as demolition chic designer jeans, crisp enough to cut glass, pristine hiking boots that had probably never encountered actual dirt, and sunglasses expensive enough to fund a small nation's road maintenance budget. But her accessory choice really told the story. A large coffee cup and what appeared to be actual movie theater popcorn in a paper bag. She'd literally brought snacks to watch my life's work get pulverized. "Morning, Frank," she called out with the false cheer of a game show host announcing consolation prizes. "Sorry it came to this, but safety regulations are safety regulations." She positioned herself on a small hill where she could observe both the demolition and my reaction, occasionally munching popcorn like she was settling in for matinee entertainment. The sound of her crunching carried across the morning air, mixing with diesel rumbles in a symphony that would have made Beethoven weep for humanity's lost soul. Morrison consulted his paperwork with the solemnity of someone reading nuclear launch codes, then signaled the bulldozer operator. "All right, let's remove this unauthorized structure, start with the spillway, work back toward the main embankment." I activated my phone's recording function and settled into Eleanor's old rocking chair on the front porch, positioned perfectly to document the proceedings for posterity and federal prosecutors. My trail cameras were rolling, Dylan's smartphone app monitored real-time water levels, and somewhere in Denver, Jessica was coordinating with FBI agents who'd developed sudden professional interest in explosive devices, mysteriously appearing on private property. The bulldozer's blade bit into my carefully laid stonework with the grinding crunch of metal against rock, each impact sending vibrations through the ground that resonated in my bones like a tuning fork struck by tragedy. 3 years of careful construction, demolished in minutes by someone who probably couldn't engineer a paper airplane capable of straight flight. Water immediately began flowing faster through the damaged spillway, transforming Eleanor's gentle trickle into an angry rush that carved new channels through disturbed earth like liquid dynamite. I watched flow velocity increase exactly as Tom Rodriguez's hydrological models had predicted, and started my internal countdown timer toward inevitable disaster. "Looks like everything's proceeding perfectly," Brenda announced, raising her coffee cup in mock celebration. "Should have your property restored to natural conditions shortly." Natural conditions. As if my engineered pond wasn't more natural than the concrete drainage ditches and ornamental fountains scattered throughout her precious development like expensive band-aids on poor planning. The demolition consumed exactly 47 minutes. 47 minutes to destroy something that had required 3 years to build, that had protected this valley from flooding for half a decade, that had provided sanctuary for countless animals and solace for one grieving widower trying to honor his wife's memory. When the bulldozer finally shut down, silence fell like a curtain dropping on the final act of a tragedy. Water flowed through the demolished area in patterns that already looked wrong. Too fast, too concentrated, carving channels where dispersed flow should have spread the energy safely across the landscape. Morrison wiped his hands on his pants like he'd just completed honest labor instead of municipal vandalism. "That should resolve your drainage issues, Kowalski. Creek's back to natural flow patterns now." Both vehicles disappeared down the road with the smug satisfaction of people who'd just solved a problem without bothering to consider consequences that would manifest in someone else's backyard. But I wasn't watching their retreat. I was monitoring my phone, tracking Dylan's real-time water level readings from sensors positioned downstream like early warning systems for approaching catastrophe. Numbers were climbing faster than a rocket launch, creek velocity increasing exactly as our computer models had calculated. By evening, water had risen 18 inches. By midnight, it carved new channels around concrete culverts that channeled flow under Willowbrook's expensive driveways. By dawn of the second day, I could hear rushing water from my kitchen window, not the gentle babble of mountain streams, but the angry growl of a creek running dangerously high and fast. Weather Service predicted the spring storm would hit tomorrow, bringing warm temperatures that would accelerate mountain snowmelt precisely as the creek reached maximum instability. Perfect timing for a disaster that would dominate news cycles and federal investigations. I poured coffee and prepared to watch Mother Nature collect her bill with interest, compounded over years of human arrogance and municipal corruption. The reckoning was less than 24 hours away. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, but by 6:30 the community center parking lot resembled a disaster relief staging area crossed with a media circus. News vans from 3 Denver stations crowded the entrance, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray storm clouds that had been dumping warm rain on the mountains all afternoon. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with coffee from news crews, and the electric tension of a community teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with barely contained pandemonium. Folding chairs packed beyond fire code capacity, overflow crowds pressed against walls decorated with children's finger paintings that seemed heartbreakingly innocent compared to the adult corruption about to be exposed. County officials huddled in worried clusters. FBI agents in off-the-rack suits attempted invisibility with all the success of elephants hiding behind house plants. And somewhere in the back, Denver Post reporter Sarah Blair positioned recording equipment with the surgical precision of someone preparing to document history. Brenda approached the podium wearing her most serious Navy power suit, the same outfit she'd chosen for my dam's execution 3 days earlier. But confidence had abandoned her like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Gone was the honeyed authority, replaced by the brittle tension of someone watching their carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency session," she began, voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence. "As you're aware, we're experiencing unprecedented flooding conditions threatening our entire community. Unprecedented. as if spring runoff was some supernatural phenomenon that defied all human prediction and preparation. County engineering has confirmed that recent heavy rains, combined with unusually high snowmelt, have created dangerous conditions along Willowbrook Creek, she continued, consulting notes with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. We're here to discuss emergency response and, unfortunately, special assessments that will be necessary to address infrastructure damage. Rick Hoffman leaned into his microphone with the authority of a man whose deck was currently relocating itself downstream. We're looking at $1,500 per household minimum for emergency flood mitigation. This disaster caught everyone completely off guard. That's when Betty Blair rose from her chair like an avenging angel disguised as a retired elementary school teacher, manila folder clutched like a sword of righteous fury. Actually, someone predicted this exact disaster, she announced, her voice cutting through the room's tension like a church bell tolling Judgment Day. Mr. Frank Kowalski warned this board repeatedly that removing his dam would cause precisely these flooding conditions. 200 heads swiveled toward my back row position faster than spectators following a tennis match, while murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind across troubled water. "Mrs. Blair," Brenda interrupted desperately, "this hardly seems appropriate for—" "Appropriate?" Betty's teacher voice could have etched glass. "Frank's dam protected this community for 5 years. You illegally demolished it despite having zero legal authority. Now you want homeowners to pay for consequences you deliberately caused?" The room erupted into controlled chaos. Homeowners who'd entered worried about special assessments suddenly demanded answers about legal liability, municipal responsibility, and exactly who would face consequences for their flooded basements. I stood up, evidence binders balanced in arms that had carried heavier loads over 30 years of honest plumbing work, and walked toward the front. The crowd parted like biblical waters, 200 pairs of eyes tracking my progress with the intensity of people finally ready for truth instead of political theater. "May I address these accusations?" I asked, though I was already positioning myself at the microphone. Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but with cameras rolling and federal agents scribbling notes, she managed a nod that carried all the enthusiasm of someone signing their own confession. I opened my evidence binder and displayed enlarged photographs showing Dale Morrison sabotaging my dam under cover of darkness, each image crystal clear thanks to Dylan's high-definition trail cameras. 3 nights ago, County Building Inspector Dale Morrison was photographed placing explosive devices on my private property, I announced, holding up evidence for the room to absorb. These devices were designed to create artificial damage justifying emergency demolition orders. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Even the children's artwork seemed to lean in closer. Furthermore, I continued, revealing email printouts that documented systematic corruption, Freedom of Information Act requests, uncovered a 2-year conspiracy between Inspector Morrison and Board President Ashworth. They targeted elderly residents with manufactured violations, forcing property sales that netted Mrs. Ashworth's real estate business over $1 million in illegal profits. Camera flashes popped like celebration fireworks while that number settled over the crowd like toxic fog. But their greatest crime was destroying flood protection they knew this community desperately needed. They demolished my dam knowing spring runoff approached, knowing removal would cause exactly the disaster flooding your homes tonight. I paused, letting silence amplify the weight of truth. 30 years ago, I built that dam to protect my property. It ended up protecting all of yours. You destroyed it over $200 in illegally imposed fines, orchestrated by criminals who profited from the chaos they created. My eyes found Brenda's pale face in the front row. My wife Eleanor used to say that character reveals itself when people think nobody's watching. Well, everyone's watching now, and your character is currently flooding their basements. At that moment, county sheriff's deputies moved toward Morrison, who was attempting to slip out through emergency exits while FBI agents blocked his escape routes. Game over. Justice had arrived with handcuffs and federal charges. 6 months later, I stood beside the new dam watching morning mist rise from water that reflected autumn clouds like Eleanor's favorite mirror, the antique one with silver backing that made everything look softer, more forgiving. The rebuilt structure was bigger than my original, professionally engineered with federal grant money, and designed to handle 100-year floods with room to spare. But the best part wasn't the technical specifications. It was the bronze plaque mounted on Colorado granite, reading Eleanor Kowalski Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary, surrounded by her favorite wildflowers that bloomed now like nature's own celebration of second chances. The legal resolution had been swift and brutal as a mountain avalanche. Morrison pleaded guilty to federal corruption charges, earning 18 months in Club Fed and permanent banishment from government employment. His pension got seized for victim restitution, though watching a corrupt bureaucrat lose his retirement felt better than any monetary compensation. Sometimes justice tastes sweetest when served with a side of career destruction. Brenda's downfall was more comprehensive and infinitely more satisfying. FBI investigation uncovered 8 years of systematic property fraud, resulting in federal racketeering charges that carried serious prison time. Her real estate empire collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, assets frozen for victim compensation, ultimately paying $800,000 in restitution, every blood-soaked penny she'd extorted from vulnerable neighbors. My fines got refunded with interest, legal fees covered by HOA insurance, and the county delivered a formal apology I framed next to Eleanor's favorite photograph. Sometimes vindication arrives with official letterhead and municipal crow-eating. But personal victory wasn't the real prize systemic change was. The Willowbrook rule became state legislation requiring independent oversight for HOA demolition orders, while new county policies mandated external review whenever building inspectors made decisions involving their golf buddies. Future Brendas and Morrisons would find corruption considerably more difficult and expensive. Environmental restoration exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Our enhanced dam became a showcase for sustainable water management, attracting partnerships with Colorado State University for hydrology research and State Wildlife Division for habitat programs. What began as one widower's grief project had evolved into a living classroom teaching future generations how to balance development with natural systems. Wildlife returned like old friends coming home. Wood ducks paddling with their broods, great blue herons fishing with professional patience, beavers rebuilding lodges with engineering precision that would shame most human contractors. The sound of water flowing over the spillway mixed with children's laughter from families exploring walking trails and educational programs that explained how smart water management protects communities while supporting ecosystems. Personal healing surprised me most. Somewhere between fighting corruption and rebuilding Eleanor's sanctuary, I'd transformed from bitter widower into something resembling community protector. Coffee mornings with Hugo, Martha, and Betty became sacred weekly rituals, while neighbors dropped by regularly to check on both me and the critters who'd made our valley home. The Memorial Foundation, established with legal settlement funds, had assisted 31 families facing HOA harassment, municipal corruption, or fraudulent property schemes. We'd prevented 8 forced sales, exposed 3 kickback operations, and created educational programs teaching seniors their rights when confronting institutional bullying. Professional recognition followed media attention like applause after a standing ovation. 3 neighboring HOAs hired me as water management consultant, paying the same hillbilly plumber they'd once scorned to design flood control that actually worked. Colorado Engineering Society awarded honorary membership for practical hydrological applications in community protection. Fancy talk for old guy who understood gravity. The foundation's crown jewel was our scholarship program, funded ironically by Brenda's restitution payments. 36 students would study environmental engineering at Colorado State next year, learning to protect communities instead of exploiting them for personal profit. Eleanor would have loved that irony corruption money financing education that prevented future corruption. But sweetest moments came on mornings like this, sitting on the bench overlooking Eleanor's sanctuary, watching sunrise paint water with colors she would have treasured. The great blue heron had returned, patient, persistent, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. My phone buzzed with foundation voicemail from a widow in Texas facing sidewalk violations and municipal harassment that sounded disturbingly familiar. Another David facing municipal Goliath, another fight worth fighting. Looks like Texas needs a dam builder, I told the heron, who maintained his vigil with the wisdom of someone understanding that justice requires patience. Eleanor always said bullies count on good people staying quiet. Well, we'd gotten pretty loud, and results spoke louder than words. Share your HOA horror story below. Let's document this epidemic of petty tyranny and help the next Frank fight back. Hit subscribe for more stories where David outsmarts Goliath. Remember, they're counting on your silence. Don't give them that satisfaction.